I never thought I'd be the kind of person who kept a secret like this. I mean, you see it in movies, you hear about it from a friend of a friend, you scroll past the Reddit threads late at night when you can't sleep, but you never actually think it's going to be you. You never think you're going to be the one sitting in a parked car in a grocery store lot at 2 in the morning, staring at your phone, trying to figure out how the hell you got here. How a single conversation, innocent at first, could unravel every single thing you thought you knew about yourself. My name is Sarah, and I've been with my boyfriend Mark for almost 6 years now. We met in college, back when life was cheap beer and ramen noodles and we didn't care about anything except getting through finals and finding a place that had good Wi-Fi. We grew up together in a way. We navigated our first real jobs, our first apartment that didn't have a mold problem, our first big fight that lasted 3 days and ended with us ordering pizza and crying it out on the living room floor. He's a good man, I know that. He's steady, he's reliable, he remembers to take out the trash without me asking most of the time. He fixes things around the house, he leaves sweet notes on the bathroom mirror, and he never forgets my birthday. It's the kind of love that people call comfortable. And for a long time I thought comfortable was exactly what I wanted. But then there was the night everything changed. The night we lost track of time. It was a Thursday in late October. The kind of autumn evening in Chicago where the air gets that crisp bite to it, and the leaves on the streets crunch under your boots like potato chips. I had just gotten off work from my marketing job downtown, and the train was delayed, which meant I was standing on the platform for 45 minutes, shivering in my thin jacket, watching the city lights blur against the dark sky. I was exhausted. Not the kind of exhausted that a good night's sleep can fix, but the kind that sits deep in your bones. The kind that makes you question why you're doing any of it. Mark had a late shift at the hospital. He's a nurse, so his schedule is all over the place, and he had texted me saying he'd probably be home around midnight. I remember staring at that text, the little blue bubble on my screen, and feeling this strange pang of loneliness. It wasn't his fault. It was just how things had been. Two people living parallel lives, occasionally crossing paths in the kitchen for a hurried dinner. I loved him, I really did, but lately the silence between us had been getting louder. We'd sit on the couch watching Netflix, and I'd realize we hadn't actually spoken in 2 hours. Just the ambient noise of the TV and the hum of the refrigerator. That was the context when I walked into the Rusty Nail, that little dive bar a few blocks from our apartment. I didn't plan to stop there. I was actually heading straight home to heat up leftovers and maybe take a hot bath. But the trains were delayed and the place was warm. The kind of warm that seeps into your skin and makes you feel slightly human again. The windows were fogged up from the heat inside, and there was a clatter of glasses, a low murmur of conversation, and some indie rock playing from a jukebox in the corner. It felt alive, and I think I wanted to feel alive too. That's where I met him. Ethan. He was sitting at the end of the bar nursing a whiskey on the rocks. I didn't notice him at first. I just slid onto a stool, ordered a glass of Pinot Noir, and started scrolling through my phone pretending to be occupied. But then he said something. I don't even remember what it was, something about the weather or the train delay, or maybe he just commented on the book I had sticking out of my tote bag. It was so ordinary, so mundane. But the way he said it, the way his voice had this low, warm timbre to it, it made me look up. And when I looked at him, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. A jolt, a little spark of electricity right in my chest. He was tall, with messy brown hair and eyes that were a shade of green I'd never really seen before. He had this easy smile, the kind that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He was wearing a weathered leather jacket over a simple white t-shirt, and he looked like he just stepped out of a movie. I know how that sounds, I know it's cliché, but it's the truth, and he wasn't just good looking. There was something else, something in the way he listened. He had this way of tilting his head slightly, like he was genuinely curious about every word you were saying. He wasn't looking over your shoulder to see if someone more interesting had walked in. He was right there in the moment with you. We started talking. I have no idea how long it was before I even realized I'd put my phone face down on the bar. We talked about everything and nothing. He was an architect, which immediately fascinated me because I've always been drawn to people who build things. He just moved back to the city after a few years in New York, and he was still getting used to the rhythm of Chicago. He talked about the buildings he loved, the ones with the old brick facades and the iron fire escapes, and the way the light hit the river in the afternoon. He had this way of describing things that made the city feel magical again. I found myself telling him things I hadn't told anyone. About my job, how I felt like I was just going through the motions. About my mom, who lives in Florida now and calls me once a week to ask if I'm eating properly. And eventually, about Mark. I told him I had a boyfriend, and I saw this flicker in his eyes, a quick shadow that disappeared just as fast, replaced by that easy smile again. He didn't push. He didn't ask questions. He just listened, and I kept talking. The wine warmed my belly and the bar got cozier and the world outside the frosted windows became a distant blur. A couple of hours must have passed because the bartender started wiping down the counter and giving us the subtle hint that it was closing time. I remember looking at my phone and seeing a text from Mark. Home soon. Lights are off so I'm heading to bed. Love you. I typed back a quick love you too without really feeling the weight of those words. We walked out together, the cold air hitting us like a slap. I could see my breath in the thin glow of the streetlights. I expected us to just go our separate ways, say goodbye and that would be it. A random encounter on a random Thursday, but we didn't. Ethan said he was heading in the same direction and we started walking. We passed by my apartment building and I didn't stop. I kept walking. I wasn't ready for the night to end. We walked all the way to the lake. The water was dark and choppy, the waves lapping against the shore in a steady rhythm. The city lights reflected off the surface, making everything look like a painting. We found a bench and we sat there for what felt like forever. The conversation deepened. He asked me what I was afraid of, and I was so taken aback by the question because nobody had asked me that in years. Not Mark, not my friends, not anyone. I told him the truth. I told him I was afraid of waking up in 20 years and realizing I'd settled, that I'd chosen safe over happy, that I'd stopped asking myself what I actually wanted. I told him I felt like I was playing a role in a play I didn't audition for, and he just sat there nodding, his hands shoved in his jacket pockets. Then he told me he felt the same way. That he'd been running from that feeling his whole life, moving from city to city, job to job, trying to outrun the quiet. We talked about our families, our childhoods, our first heartbreaks. We talked about the dreams we'd given up on and the ones we were too scared to chase. It was the most intimate conversation I'd had in years. It was the kind of conversation that doesn't happen anymore. It's too vulnerable, too real. We'd lost track of time completely. The sky was still black, but there was a faint hint of gray creeping in at the edges, the promise of dawn. And in that moment, sitting on that bench with a stranger I'd met just a few hours ago, I felt more seen than I had in 6 years. It was a terrifying feeling because it was right. It was so right and it shouldn't have been. I was with Mark. I was supposed to be with Mark. But the person sitting next to me was making me feel a version of myself that I thought had died a long time ago. A version that was brave and spontaneous and deeply, achingly alive. I didn't kiss him that night. I wanted to, God, I wanted to. It would have been so easy. The air was charged and the tension between us was so thick you could cut it with a knife. He was looking at me, his green eyes soft and searching. He leaned in just a little and my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. But then he stopped. He smiled, that crooked, perfect smile, and he said, "It's almost morning, you should probably get some sleep." And he was right. I walked home in a daze, the sun just starting to paint the sky pink and orange. I slipped into the apartment as quietly as I could, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. Mark was asleep in our bed, his back turned to me, his breathing slow and steady. I stood in the doorway for a long minute watching him. He looked peaceful, he looked safe, and I felt like the biggest fraud on the planet. I climbed into bed beside him, careful not to wake him, and stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned. All I could think about was the sound of Ethan's laugh, the way his hand had brushed against mine when he'd pointed out a ship on the lake. All I could think about was how I hadn't wanted that moment on the bench to end. That was the moment. That was when it started. I told myself it was just a conversation. I told myself it didn't mean anything. But I was lying to myself because something inside me had shifted. The box I'd carefully packed my feelings into, the one labeled content, had split open. And I couldn't tape it back together no matter how hard I tried. The days that followed were a blur of autopilot. I went to work, I answered emails, I sat in meetings and nodded at the right times, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. It was on that bench on the lake in the warm amber glow of that dive bar. I kept replaying the conversation over and over in my head, dissecting every word, every glance, every small, innocent touch. I was obsessed. Not in a creepy, stalker kind of way, but in the way you become obsessed with a song you can't stop humming. It was there, underneath everything, a constant low hum of anticipation. I didn't tell anyone, not my best friend Jenna, who I tell everything to, not my sister who lives across town and can always tell when something is off. I couldn't. How do you explain to the people who love you that you met a stranger in a bar, and suddenly your entire relationship feels like a sweater with a pulled thread? How do you admit that you're questioning everything you've built for 6 years over a conversation that lasted just a few hours? It sounded insane. It sounded like the plot of some cheesy romance novel, but it was my reality and I was drowning in it. 3 days later, I saw him again. It was Sunday afternoon, and I was at a coffee shop in Wicker Park, the one with the mismatched furniture and the industrial lighting that makes everyone look like they're in a music video. I was supposed to be working on a presentation for Monday, but I was really just staring at my laptop screen, watching the cursor blink mockingly at me. I had my noise-canceling headphones on, but I wasn't listening to anything. I was just trying to disappear into the background noise, and then I looked up and there he was. Ethan was standing at the counter ordering a black coffee. He was wearing a gray hoodie and jeans, and he looked just as effortlessly gorgeous as he had the other night. My heart did this weird flip-flop thing in my chest, and for a split second I thought about ducking under the table, but it was too late. He turned around, scanning the room for a seat, and his eyes landed on me. The smile that spread across his face was like a sunrise. It was genuine, warm, and full of recognition. He walked over, his coffee in hand, and without even asking, he pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. "Well, look who it is," he said, his voice low and amused. "The girl who stays out all night talking to strangers on benches." I laughed, a nervous, breathless laugh. "I could say the same about you. I guess we're both creatures of bad decisions," he said, shrugging. He took a sip of his coffee and studied me over the rim of his cup. "You look tired." "Gee, thanks," I said, rolling my eyes, but I knew he was right. I hadn't been sleeping well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. He didn't push. He just leaned back in his chair and looked around the coffee shop. "I didn't peg you as a Wicker Park kind of girl." "I'm not," I said. "I just needed to get out of the apartment. Too much stuff," he repeated, a knowing smile on his lips. "That's a vague way of saying you're avoiding something." I bristled for a moment. It was too close to the truth, but then I sighed because what was the point of pretending? He'd already seen a part of me that most people hadn't. "Maybe I am." He nodded, accepting that. "I get it. Sometimes the walls close in, right? You need a different scenery just to remind yourself the world is bigger than your living room." And just like that, we fell back into it. The conversation flowed easier than water. We talked about music, about movies, about the stupid little things that make life worth living. He told me about his favorite spot in the city, a rooftop garden that overlooked the river, and I told him about a bookstore I loved that smelled like old paper and had a cat that slept on the philosophy section. It was effortless. It was like we'd known each other for years, not just a handful of hours across 2 meetings. We spent the entire afternoon together. I never touched my laptop. We walked through the neighborhood, past the vintage shops and the street performers, and we grabbed sandwiches from a deli that he swore had the best pastrami in the city. He was right. It was amazing. Everything felt amplified with him. The colors were brighter, the food tasted better, the air felt cleaner. It was intoxicating, and I knew it was dangerous. The sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and we ended up at that rooftop garden he'd mentioned. It was even more beautiful than he'd described. There were string lights hanging overhead, and the city sprawled out below us like a giant, glittering map. We sat on a little bench, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off his body. That's when he asked me about Mark. "So," he said, his voice casual but his eyes serious. "You never really told me about him, about you and him." I stiffened. I had known this question was coming. It was the elephant in the room, the one we'd been carefully dancing around. I looked out at the skyline, trying to find the right words. He's a good guy, he's kind, he's stable, he's everything you're supposed to want." "But," Ethan prompted, his voice soft. I hesitated. The words felt like a betrayal just sitting on my tongue, but I couldn't stop them. "But I don't know if he's everything I want. I don't know if I even know what I want anymore." Ethan didn't look smug or triumphant. He didn't look like he was trying to win me over. He just looked at me with that deep, searching gaze of his, and he said, "I think everyone feels that way sometimes. The trick is figuring out if it's a phase or a fundamental truth." We sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the city a distant hum below us. Then he reached over and took my hand. It was just a simple gesture, his fingers lacing through mine, but it sent a shockwave through my entire body. I didn't pull away, I held on. "I'm not going to pretend I don't feel something here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about you since that night. I've been trying to figure out why I felt so drawn to you. And I think it's because you're real, Sarah. You're not playing a game, you're just you." Tears pricked at my eyes. I didn't know why I was crying. Maybe because I hadn't felt this scene in a very long time. Maybe because I was scared. Scared of how much I wanted him, and scared of what that meant for the life I had. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice cracking. "I'm scared of making a mistake. I'm scared of hurting Mark. He doesn't deserve this." "No," Ethan said, squeezing my hand. "He doesn't, but neither do you. You don't deserve to feel like you're settling. You don't deserve to feel like you're just going through the motions. That's not living, Sarah. That's just existing." It was exactly what I needed to hear. And it was exactly what I didn't want to hear, because it made everything so much more complicated. I went home that night, and the apartment felt smaller than it had before. Mark was there, cooking dinner in the kitchen. He was making my favorite, spaghetti with homemade meatballs, and the smell filled the whole place. He turned around when he heard me come in, and he had flour on his cheek. "Hey babe," he said, smiling. "I was starting to wonder when you'd be back. I was thinking we could watch that new movie tonight, the one on Netflix, and maybe open that bottle of wine we've been saving." And I just stood there looking at him. He looked so happy, so genuinely happy to see me. It was like a knife in my chest. I couldn't even find the words to respond. I just nodded and mumbled something about needing to change. I went into the bedroom and shut the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling, and I stared at my reflection in the mirror. I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. She was a stranger. She was someone capable of lying to the person she loved. That night, as we watched the movie, I couldn't focus on the screen. I was aware of every inch of space between Mark and me on the couch. I was aware of the way he casually draped his arm over my shoulder, the way he laughed at the jokes, the way he looked at me with such unwavering trust. And all I could think about was Ethan's hand in mine, the way he'd said my name, the way he made me feel like the world was full of possibilities. I knew I was in deep. The line I'd told myself I wouldn't cross, the line of emotional involvement, was already a distant speck in my rearview mirror. I had crossed it the moment I let him hold my hand, and I had no idea how to go back. The next few weeks turned into a parallel life. I was, for all intents and purposes, a different person when I was with Ethan. We met up as often as we could. Lunch breaks turned into 2-hour coffee dates. Text messages turned into late-night phone calls after Mark had fallen asleep. I became an expert at lying, at covering my tracks, at inventing excuses for where I'd been. I told Mark I was working late, that I was grabbing drinks with Jenna, that I was taking a yoga class. The lies slipped out so easily, so naturally, that it frightened me. But every time I saw Ethan, every time I felt that rush of excitement, it was like a drug. I couldn't get enough of it. He took me to places I'd never been, introduced me to music I'd never heard, showed me a version of the city I'd been blind to. We'd walk through the Art Institute for hours, and he'd explain the stories behind the paintings with so much passion that I'd get lost in his words. He made me feel smart, interesting, and alive. And slowly, I started to realize that what I felt for him wasn't just infatuation. It was something deeper. It was a connection I'd never experienced before. We finished each other's sentences. We had the same weird sense of humor. We could sit in complete silence and feel completely at peace. It felt like coming home to a place you didn't know you'd been looking for. Mark noticed something was off. Of course he did. We were living together. He knew my rhythms, my moods. He started asking more questions, looking at me with those concerned eyes. "Are you okay?" he'd ask. "You seem distant lately." And I'd deflect. I'd smile and say I was just tired from work. I'd kiss him on the cheek and change the subject. I was a coward, I was a liar, and I was drowning. Then came the night it almost went too far, the night we lost track of time again. It was raining, one of those heavy Chicago downpours that turns the streets into rivers. I was supposed to be meeting Jenna for dinner, but I'd texted Ethan earlier, and he'd suggested we meet at his apartment instead. He lived in a loft in the West Loop, a place with exposed brick walls and huge windows that let in the gray light. I'd been there a few times before, always telling myself it was innocent, that it was just two friends hanging out. But I knew I was lying. I arrived soaked to the bone, my hair plastered to my face. He let me in, handed me a towel, and told me to get comfortable. He was making pasta, something simple with garlic and olive oil, and the whole place smelled amazing. We sat on his worn leather couch, drinking red wine, watching the rain streak down the windows. "I could get used to this," he said, looking at me with that intense gaze. "Used to what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "This," he said, gesturing between us. "Just being with you. It's easy, Sarah. It's the easiest thing I've ever done." My heart was hammering in my chest. I knew what was coming. I knew I should stop it, but I didn't want to stop it. I wanted him. He leaned in, and this time, neither of us pulled away. His lips met mine, and it was like a firecracker going off in my soul. It was soft at first, tentative, and then it deepened, and I felt everything I'd been suppressing for the past month come rushing to the surface. He tasted like red wine, and his hands cupped my face like I was something precious. It was the most passionate kiss I'd ever experienced. It felt like the world was spinning off its axis, and I was perfectly fine with it. We pulled apart, breathless, our foreheads touching. He looked at me with a question in his eyes. "Sarah," he said, his voice husky, "tell me what you want." I opened my mouth to answer. I wanted to say, "I want this, I want you, I want to blow up my entire life and just be with you." But the words caught in my throat. I saw Mark's face. I saw the life we'd built. I saw the years of memories, the laughter, the tears, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't make that final leap. "I can't," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry, I can't, not like this." The disappointment in his eyes was devastating, but he didn't get angry. He just nodded slowly and pulled away. "I understand," he said. "I'm not going to pressure you, but Sarah, you need to figure this out. You can't keep living in this in-between place. It's not fair to you, it's not fair to Mark, and it's not fair to me." I knew he was right. I knew I had to make a choice, but I didn't know if I was strong enough to make it. I left his apartment that night and walked home in the rain, my clothes clinging to my body, my mind a storm of confusion. When I got home, Mark was still awake, waiting for me on the couch. He looked up, and his expression shifted from concern to worry. "Sarah, you're soaking wet," he said, jumping up. "Where the hell have you been? I called you like 10 times. My phone was dead. I'd been so caught up in the moment I hadn't even noticed." "I'm sorry," I said, my voice hollow. "I lost track of time. I was with Jenna in the rain." He didn't buy it. I could see it in his eyes. He knew I was lying, but he didn't push. He just handed me a towel and told me to go take a hot shower. I did, and I stood under the water for a long time, letting the heat wash over me, trying to wash away the guilt. But it wouldn't wash away. It was embedded in my skin. I knew that night that I had to make a decision. I couldn't keep straddling the fence. I was going to lose both of them if I didn't choose. And the thought of losing Ethan was unbearable. But the thought of breaking Mark's heart was equally unbearable. I was trapped in a prison of my own making, and the only way out was through. The week that followed was the longest of my life. I walked around in a fog, my body going through the motions while my mind was stuck in a perpetual loop of guilt and desire. Every time Mark looked at me, I saw the question in his eyes. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was Ethan, and I hated myself for hoping that. I was a mess. I was a cliché. I was the villain in my own story, and I didn't know how to rewrite the ending. It was Jenna who finally cornered me. She showed up at my apartment on a Friday night, unannounced, with a bottle of cheap rosé and a look on her face that said she wasn't leaving until I told her everything. We'd been friends since freshman year of college, and she could read me better than anyone. She knew something was wrong, and she wasn't going to let me brush her off with another lie. "Okay, spill," she said, plopping down on my couch and kicking off her boots. "You've been acting weird for weeks. You canceled on me 3 times last month, you're not returning my calls, and you look like you haven't slept in a decade. What's going on?" I sat down across from her, my hands trembling slightly. I opened my mouth to tell her another excuse, another lie, but nothing came out. The words wouldn't form. I was so tired of lying, so tired of carrying the weight of the secret all by myself. "I met someone," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jenna's eyes went wide. She set the wine bottle down and leaned forward. "What do you mean you met someone? Like a coworker, a friend?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "Like, I met someone at a bar, we talked all night, and now, I don't know what to do." She stared at me for a long moment, processing, then she let out a low whistle and leaned back against the couch. "Oh, Sarah, oh honey, tell me everything from the beginning." And I did. I told her about the rusty nail, about the bench by the lake, about the coffee shop, about the rooftop garden. I told her about the texts, the calls, the way Ethan made me feel like I was the only person in the world. I told her about the kiss, the almost night, the way I'd run away. And when I was done, I was crying. Big, ugly, heaving sobs that shook my entire body. "Oh, sweetie," Jenna said, moving to sit next to me and pulling me into a hug. "That's a lot, that's so much. I don't know what to do," I sobbed into her shoulder. "I love Mark, I really do, but I'm not in love with him anymore, and I don't know when that happened. I don't know if it happened gradually or if it just stopped, but I feel so guilty. I feel like a monster." Jenna was quiet for a moment, rubbing my back in slow circles. Then she pulled back and looked me in the eye. "You're not a monster, Sarah, you're human, and humans are messy. We fall in and out of love, we make mistakes, we get confused. It doesn't make you a bad person, it just makes you a person." "But Mark," I said, my voice cracking, "he doesn't deserve this. He's been nothing but good to me. He's loyal and he's kind and he loves me so much. How can I just throw that away?" "Are you throwing it away?" Jenna asked, her voice gentle but firm. "Or are you finally being honest with yourself about what you actually want? Because there's a difference. You can't stay with Mark out of guilt. That's not fair to him, and it's not fair to you, and frankly it's not fair to this Ethan guy either. You're stringing everyone along, including yourself." She was right. Of course she was right. I'd known it all along, but hearing it out loud made it feel so much more real. "The thing is," Jenna continued, pouring us both a glass of wine, "you need to figure out what you actually want. Not what you think you should want, not what would make everyone else happy. What you want. And then you need to have the courage to act on it, even if it's hard, especially if it's hard." I took a long sip of the wine, letting the warmth spread through my chest. "I think I know what I want," I admitted. "I just don't know if I'm brave enough to go after it." "That's the part nobody tells you about," Jenna said, clinking her glass against mine. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, it means you do it anyway." We talked for hours until the wine was gone and the city lights were twinkling outside the window. Jenna didn't judge me. She didn't tell me I was wrong or right. She just listened and held my hand and reminded me that I wasn't alone. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The next morning, I woke up with a resolve I hadn't felt in a long time. I was going to end things with Mark. It was the right thing to do. He deserved someone who could love him the way he deserved to be loved. And I deserved to be with someone who made me feel alive. It was terrifying and it was going to hurt, but it was the only way forward. I made a plan. I'd wait until he got home from work and I'd sit him down and tell him the truth. Everything, no more lies, no more secrets, just the unvarnished, painful truth. But the universe had other plans. That afternoon I was at home, pacing the living room, rehearsing what I was going to say. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding, and I felt like I was going to throw up. I must have gone over the conversation 100 times in my head. I'd start with how much I loved him, how he was one of the best people I'd ever known. Then I'd tell him about the distance, the drifting apart, the way I'd been feeling for months. And then I'd tell him about Ethan. I'd be honest because he deserved that. He deserved to know why. I heard his key in the lock and my stomach lurched. He walked in looking tired, his scrubs still on from his shift. He kicked off his shoes and dropped his bag by the door. "Hey babe," he said, giving me a tired smile. Long day, you wouldn't believe the shift I had. We had this one patient, a kid, and Mark, I said, cutting him off. My voice was shaking. We need to talk. He stopped mid-sentence, his smile fading as he looked at me. He must have seen something in my eyes, some flicker of fear or guilt, because his expression shifted to one of concern. What's wrong? Are you okay? I took a deep breath. I could feel the words building up in my throat, ready to spill out. I was about to do it. I was about to blow up my entire life, and then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his face went pale. I'm sorry, I have to take this, he said, stepping into the kitchen. It's the hospital. I stood there, frozen, my heart racing as he answered the call. I couldn't hear the conversation clearly, just the low murmur of his voice, but I could tell something was wrong. His shoulders tensed and he started pacing back and forth. Okay, he said into the phone. Okay, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Yeah, I'm on my way. He hung up and turned to me, his face ashen. Sarah, I have to go. It's an emergency. There was a car accident, a bad one, and they need all hands on deck. I don't know when I'll be back. I nodded, my words dying in my throat. Of course, go, I'll be here. He grabbed his bag and rushed out the door, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the living room. The moment was gone. The courage I'd mustered had evaporated, and I was left with nothing but the echo of what I almost said. That night I sat on the couch waiting for him to come home. I texted Ethan, told him I needed to see him. He responded almost immediately, asking if I was okay. I told him I would be. I just needed to talk. We agreed to meet the next day, but Mark never came home that night. I fell asleep on the couch, and when I woke up in the morning, the apartment was still empty. I checked my phone and there was a text from him sent at 3 in the morning. Still at the hospital, don't wait up, love you. I felt a pang of guilt. He was working so hard, saving lives, dealing with emergencies, and I was about to destroy him. I was about to tell him that the person he trusted most in the world had been lying to him for weeks. I didn't deserve him. That was the thought that kept running through my head. I didn't deserve his kindness, his loyalty, his love. I was a fraud, a liar, a cheat, and yet I couldn't stop myself. I had to see Ethan. I had to know once and for all if what we had was real or if I was just chasing a fantasy. We met at a quiet cafe in Logan Square, the kind of place that had mismatched chairs and chalkboard menus and a cat that lounged on the windowsill. It was pretentious and cozy, and I hated it and loved it at the same time. Ethan was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. He looked up when I walked in and his eyes softened. Hey, he said, sliding a cup toward me. You look like you haven't slept. I haven't, I admitted, sitting down. I was about to tell Mark everything last night, and then he got called into work. Ethan's expression flickered, a mix of hope and anxiety. Are you going to do it? Are you going to tell him? I looked at him, really looked at him. The way his jaw was set, the way his fingers were wrapped around his coffee cup, the way he was looking at me like I held his entire world in my hands. And I knew in that moment that I couldn't keep living in the gray area. I had to make a choice. Yes, I said, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. I'm going to tell him. I'm going to end things. I want to be with you, Ethan. I've been fighting it for so long, but I can't fight it anymore. I'm done pretending. The relief that washed over his face was palpable. He reached across the table and took my hand, his grip warm and reassuring. You have no idea how happy that makes me, Sarah. I've been waiting to hear you say that. I was starting to think I'd lost you. You didn't lose me, I said, squeezing his hand. I was just scared. I'm still scared, but I know what I want now. I want you. We sat there for a long time, just holding hands and talking. We talked about the future, about what our life might look like together. It was exciting and terrifying all at once. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving toward something, not running away from something. I went home that evening with a plan. Mark's shift was supposed to end at 8, and I was going to be there waiting for him. I was going to tell him everything, no more delays, no more excuses. It was time. I got home around 6 and the apartment was empty. I took a shower, changed into something comfortable, and sat on the couch, my heart pounding in my chest. I rehearsed my speech over and over again, trying to find the right words. There were no right words. There was only the truth, ugly and raw as it was. At 7:30, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Ethan. Thinking of you, you've got this. I'll be here when you're done. I smiled, a tiny flicker of warmth in the cold knot of anxiety in my chest. I typed back a quick reply. Thank you, I love you. It was the first time I'd said it, the first time I'd admitted it out loud, even in writing, and it felt right. It felt more right than anything had in a long time. At 8, Mark's key turned in the lock. He walked in looking exhausted, his face drawn and pale. He dropped his bag by the door and shuffled over to me on the couch, collapsing beside me with a heavy sigh. Long day, he said, rubbing his eyes. I'm so tired, all I want to do is sleep for a week. I took a deep breath. This was it, this was the moment. Mark, I said, my voice trembling. I need to tell you something. He turned to look at me, his eyes weary but warm. What is it, babe? I opened my mouth. I was about to say the words. I was about to change everything, but then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught in my throat, my heart stopped. Sarah, he said, his voice suddenly full of emotion. I was going to wait for the right moment, but I can't wait anymore. I love you. I've loved you since the day I met you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." He opened the box, and inside was a ring, a beautiful, simple diamond ring that caught the light and sparkled like 1,000 tiny stars. "Will you marry me?" The world tilted. The room spun, and I felt like I was falling through the floor into some dark, endless void. My ears were ringing, my mouth was dry, and my heart was hammering so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I stared at the ring in that little velvet box, and it was the most beautiful, terrifying thing I had ever seen. The diamond winked at me, catching the soft lamplight, and all I could think about was the text I had just sent to Ethan. The words "I love you" were still burning on my screen, a confession I could never take back, and yet here was Mark kneeling in front of me asking me to be his wife. He was looking at me with those hopeful, tired eyes, the same eyes that had looked at me 1,000 times over the past 6 years. Through late-night study sessions, through job interviews, through funerals and weddings, and everything in between. He had been my rock, my constant, my safe harbor, and I was about to shatter him into a million pieces. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I was frozen, trapped in that single, excruciating moment. My brain was screaming at me to say something, anything, but my voice was gone. I felt like I was watching myself from outside my body, a spectator to my own catastrophe. "Sarah." Mark's voice was soft, uncertain. The light in his eyes flickered, dimmed just a little. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I blinked, and a tear slipped down my cheek, and then another, and then I was crying, ugly sobs that tore through my chest like jagged glass. I couldn't stop them, they just came, a torrent of guilt and fear and sorrow that I had been holding back for weeks. Mark's face crumpled with confusion. He set the ring box down on the coffee table and reached for me, his hands warm and steady. Hey, what's wrong? Sarah, talk to me. Whatever it is, we can fix it." "Don't," I choked out, pulling away from him. "Don't touch me, please, I don't deserve that." He recoiled, looking like I had just slapped him. The confusion in his eyes was replaced by something darker, a creeping dread that I had seen before on the faces of people who knew bad news was coming. "What are you talking about? What's going on?" I took a deep, ragged breath. The walls were closing in on me, the air thick and suffocating. I had planned for this moment. I had rehearsed it 100 times in my head. But now that it was here, I couldn't remember a single word I had practiced. I was raw, exposed, and completely at a loss. "Mark, I have to tell you something," I said, my voice cracking. "Something I should have told you a long time ago, something you're not going to want to hear." He stared at me, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. "Just say it, Sarah, whatever it is, just say it." I looked down at my hands, at my trembling fingers, and I forced myself to speak. I've been seeing someone else." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and poisonous. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark didn't move, he didn't blink, he just stared at me, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. "What?" he finally whispered. The single word was loaded with so much pain that I felt it like a physical blow. "I'm sorry," I sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. It happened. I met someone and I tried to stop it. I tried to push him away, but I couldn't. I fell in love with him, Mark, and I didn't know how to tell you. I was a coward." The mask shattered. Pain flashed across his face, raw and unguarded. For a second, I saw the boy I had fallen in love with, the one who had held me when my grandmother died, who had driven 6 hours in the middle of the night just to bring me soup when I was sick. And then the pain hardened into something else, something cold and sharp. "Who is he?" Mark demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Who the hell is he?" "His name is Ethan," I said, my voice barely audible. "I met him at a bar a few weeks ago. We just started talking, and one thing led to another, and you've been sleeping with him." Mark cut me off, his eyes blazing. "No," I said quickly. "No, I swear, it didn't go that far. We kissed once, but it was more than that. It was emotional. We connected in a way I haven't felt in a long time." Mark laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that was worse than any shout. "Oh, that makes it so much better. You emotionally cheated on me. That's what you're telling me. You fell in love with some guy you met at a bar, and you're just now telling me this." "Mark, how long?" he interrupted, his voice rising. "How long have you been lying to me? How many times did you look me in the eye and tell me you loved me when you were really thinking about him?" I couldn't answer. There was no answer that would make this better. No answer that would undo the damage I had done. He stood up abruptly, pacing the living room like a caged animal. He ran his hands through his hair, pulled at the ends, and let out a guttural sound of frustration. "I was going to marry you, Sarah. I was going to spend the rest of my life with you. I bought that ring months ago. I had a whole plan for our future, and you were out there, falling in love with someone else. While I was at the hospital working double shifts to save up for our wedding, while I was lying in bed next to you thinking about how lucky I was." I was sobbing now, my whole body shaking. I know. "And I hate myself for it. I hate myself for hurting you. You didn't deserve this. You never deserved this." He stopped pacing and turned to face me. His eyes were red-rimmed, and I could see the tears he was trying so hard to hold back. "Why, Sarah? Give me one good reason why. Was I not enough? Was I not good enough for you?" "It's not about that," I said, shaking my head. It's not about you being good enough. You're amazing, Mark. You're the best person I've ever known. But we stopped being us. We became roommates. We were just going through the motions, and I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to tell you I was unhappy. Unhappy? He laughed again, that hollow, broken sound. So instead of talking to me, instead of trying to work it out, you went and found someone else. That's your solution? That's the kind of person you are. I didn't plan it, I pleaded. I didn't go looking for it. It just happened, and I know that sounds like a cop-out. I know it does, but it's the truth. He stood there for a long moment, staring at me. The anger seemed to drain out of him, leaving behind only exhaustion and grief. He sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. So what now? He asked, his voice muffled. What do you want to do now? I swallowed hard. This was it. The moment I had been dreading. I think we should break up. Mark lifted his head and looked at me. The tears were streaming freely down his face now. You're choosing him. You're actually choosing him over us. I'm choosing myself, I said, my voice shaking. I'm choosing to be honest about what I want, and I know how selfish that sounds. I know how much it hurts, but I can't keep pretending. I can't keep lying to you. You deserve someone who can give you everything, and I can't do that anymore. He nodded slowly, a resigned, broken nod. I should have seen it coming, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I knew something was off. I thought you were just stressed. I thought if I tried harder, if I just loved you more, you would come back to me. He laughed again, but there was no humor in it. I was so stupid. Don't say that, I said, reaching for him. Don't ever say that. You weren't stupid. You were loving. You were everything a partner should be. I'm the one who failed. I'm the one who ruined everything. He pulled away from my touch, flinching like my hand was a hot iron. I can't do this right now, he said, standing up abruptly. I can't. I need to get out of here. I need to think. Mark, wait. No, he said, grabbing his jacket from the hook by the door. Don't. I need some space. He walked out the door, slamming it behind him. I sat there on the couch alone, staring at the closed door and the velvet box still sitting on the coffee table. The ring inside glinted up at me, an accusation, a reminder of everything I had thrown away. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes, hours, it all blurred together. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I felt hollow, emptied out. I had done what I had set out to do. I had told him the truth, and I had never felt more alone in my entire life. At some point, I picked up my phone. There were a dozen texts from Ethan asking if I was okay, if I had told Mark, if everything was all right. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I should have felt relief. I should have felt free, but all I felt was cold, crushing emptiness. I typed back a single word. It's done. His response was immediate. I'm coming over. I didn't have the energy to argue. I just sat there waiting, staring at the ring that Mark had left behind. When Ethan arrived, he let himself in with the spare key I had given him weeks ago. He found me on the couch, my face tear-streaked, my hands limp in my lap. He sat down beside me, his presence warm and solid. Are you okay? He asked gently, taking my hand. No, I said, my voice flat. I don't think I am. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just sat there with me, holding my hand, letting me feel everything. And in that silence, I realized something terrible. Even now, even after everything I had done, I wasn't sure if I had made the right choice. I had traded a safe, steady love for a passionate, uncertain one. I had blown up my life for a man I barely knew, but it was too late to go back. The decision was made. The bridge was burned, and all I could do was move forward, one broken step at a time. The next few days were a blur. Mark moved out. He came by with a friend to pack his things while I was at work, and when I came home, half the apartment was empty. His side of the closet, his books, his old guitar that he never played. It was like a ghost had been exorcised, and the space he left behind was cavernous. I didn't hear from him. I texted him once just to ask if he was okay, and he responded with a single word. Fine. It was cold, distant, and it cut deeper than any insult. I threw myself into my relationship with Ethan. I told myself this was what I had wanted. This was the fresh start, the new beginning I had been craving, and for a while it was good, it was exciting. He took me to concerts, to fancy restaurants, to hidden places in the city that I had never known existed. He made me laugh, he made me feel beautiful, he made me feel like I was the center of his universe. But slowly the cracks began to show. Ethan was, as it turned out, a man of grand gestures and fleeting passions. The intensity that had drawn me to him began to feel overwhelming. He wanted all of my time, all of my attention. He got jealous when I spent time with my friends, annoyed when I had to work late. He didn't understand why I was still sad about Mark, why I sometimes cried in the shower when I thought he couldn't hear me. You chose me, he said one night when I was quiet and distant. Why do you still care about him? Because I'm human, I said, my voice sharp. Because I spent 6 years of my life with him. You can't just erase that. You can't just replace it like it never happened. Ethan flinched, hurt by my words. I'm not trying to erase it, I'm just trying to understand. I thought you were happy. I am happy, I said, though the words felt hollow on my tongue. I need time, I need to process. He didn't push after that, but something had shifted between us. The fairy tale romance was starting to fray at the edges, revealing something more complicated underneath. A few weeks later, I was at a coffee shop trying to work on a freelance project when I saw her, a woman I had never met before. She walked in with a group of friends, laughing, her hair flowing behind her like a golden curtain. She was stunning, effortlessly beautiful, and she was wearing Mark's favorite cologne. I recognized it instantly, that familiar scent that had once lingered on his pillow. My heart stopped. I stared at her, my mind racing. Who was she? Why was she wearing his cologne? Was she with him? I felt sick. I packed up my laptop and fled the coffee shop, my hands trembling, my thoughts spiraling out of control. It was irrational. It was insane. Mark had every right to move on. I had been the one to leave him, but seeing that woman, smelling that scent, it sent a jolt of jealousy through me that I didn't expect. And that's when I knew I wasn't over him. I wasn't over Mark. I had convinced myself that I had fallen out of love, that I had moved on, but the truth was far more complicated. I still loved him. And I had thrown him away for a fleeting infatuation that was already starting to lose its luster. I was alone in the middle of the city, surrounded by strangers, and I had never felt so lost in my entire life. That night I sat in my apartment, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures of Mark and me at the beach, at parties, at his parents' house for Thanksgiving. It felt like I was looking at the life of a ghost, a life I had willingly walked away from. My phone buzzed. It was Jenna. "Hey, I heard through the grapevine that Mark is dating someone new. You okay?" I stared at the text, my hands shaking. No, I wasn't okay. I was the furthest thing from okay. I had burned my whole world to the ground, and now I was standing in the ashes, wondering how the hell I was supposed to rebuild.